Studies, APAICS. Welcome to our APAICS in Conversation this week. We're very happy to have two wonderful speakers with us today. Dr. Mike Wah-Win is an assistant professor of higher education at the University of Denver's Moorridge College of Education. His research examines the benefits and consequences of public policy instruments in expanding or constraining the operations of colleges and universities, with a specific focus on federally based diversity initiatives. And he is no slouch in public service, because prior to receiving his PhD, Mike served on the staff of Congressman Mike Honda, who was chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, the Asian Pacific Caucus, CAPAC. And we are honored to have as our speaker today, Frank H. Wu, who is the President Designate of Queens College, City University of New York, and the William L. Prosser Distinguished Professor of Law, following service as Chancellor and Dean at UC Hastings School of Law. He was the first Asian American faculty member at Howard University and served as Dean of Wayne State University Law School. Professor Wu has also served as chair and president of the Committee of 100 and as an appointee at the U.S. Department of Education Advisory Committee. A prolific writer, he is author of Yellow, Race in America Beyond Black and White. Don't forget to put your questions in the chat box if you're joining us through the webinar, and in the Facebook comments section if you're on Facebook. Please welcome Frank and Dr. Wynn.
Thanks so much, Madeline, and for your kind words. It really is my honor to be here, and thank you, President Wu, for joining us. So let's just get into it. And so, President Wu, so you forged a path into the senior most levels of higher education. You were, as Madeline mentioned, Chancellor of Hastings College of the Law, Dean of the Law School at Wayne State University, and soon you'll be the new president at Queens College in New York. But first, you were a lawyer. So how did you get interested in the law, and why did you become a lawyer?
Feel free to call me Frank, of course. I'll give you two answers, one about becoming a lawyer and the other about becoming a higher education leader. I've told this story many times, but however often I tell it, it still chokes me up a little bit. Many of you know the name of Vincent Chin, and you know about the tragic murder. I'll speak about it just briefly. We're coming up on the anniversary of his killing. You may know Vincent Chin, who I was not acquainted with, but I grew up just a few miles from where all this happened. And I know that time period well, better than I would like. It was the late 70s, early 80s, the hardest time and in the worst place to be Asian American, have this color of skin, texture of hair, and shape of eyes, at least since World War II. So Vincent Chin was Chinese American. He was not the model minority. He wasn't some whiz kid rocket scientist. He was just a guy. He didn't set out to be a civil rights icon or a martyr. He was working as a waiter at a Chinese restaurant and had dropped out of college. He'd gone back to technical school to be a draftsman. So really just an ordinary guy. And he was due to be married. So like any other guy, he rounded up some buddies. And they did what guys do. They had a last night out, a bachelor's party. They went to a seedy part of town. Now, this is in the early 80s. You remember when people talked about an economic Pearl Harbor, rise of the East, decline of the West. They talked about, and there was a member of Congress who used to give speeches about those little yellow men ruining the American economy. Detroit, my hometown, is the Motor City. Called that for a reason. If you don't work for a car company, well, your neighbors do. That's why we were there. My father worked for one of the big four automakers, as they were called back then. So everyone was dependent on making cars. And some of you on this webinar are just old enough to remember, people didn't drive imported cars back then. They didn't buy them, they didn't drive them, they didn't want them. Not until the mid 70s and the oil embargo and the gasoline prices spiking. You remember that, right? Well, rich people might have had a Mercedes and hippies had Volkswagens, but if you drove a Subaru or a Honda, people would have made fun of you. What is that piece of Jap crap you got, right? Because it's a 4-cylinder engine, it's small, and it came from the other side of the Pacific. But suddenly people started to buy those cars because they were better made. They were fuel efficient. That's the context for this. Terrible recession, as bad as we have it now. Double-digit unemployment. Detroit was the murder capital of America. So back to this story. Chin went out to a seedy part of town and was having a good time. Two other gentlemen, auto workers, white, a father and stepson, looked over at Chin and, to pardon the language, they started to use those racial slurs, the ones that are common cruelty of childhood. I remember well, the teasing, taunting, the bullying of the playground, chink and jap and gook, even a word you hardly ever hear anymore. Some folks who are a little older might remember nip, another way of saying jap, ugly words, fighting words. After a scuffle had broken out, and there's much more to this story, there's no dispute about the killing itself, though there is denial about the motivation. Well, what triggered everything was one of these two gentlemen, according to witnesses, not just Chin's friends, looked over at him and they said, "You little motherfucker. It's because of you motherfuckers that we're out of work." Later that night, after the sun had set, just off of Woodward Avenue, the major thoroughfare that connected the suburbs to the downtown core, using a baseball bat they had in the trunk of their car, they bludgeoned Chin to death. They took repeated swings. Witnesses said that the father, it looked like he wanted to hit a home run. They clubbed him. They struck his head, his torso, his arms, until literally his skull was cracked open, and with blood and spinal fluid and cerebral matter pulling onto the pavement beneath him, he uttered those last words, "It's not fair." It's important that I emphasize the two killers never disputed they committed the act. There were dozens of witnesses. They couldn't very well have said they didn't do it, but they said, "We're not bigots. We aren't members of the KKK. We're not skinheads. We don't put on white sheets and go out looking for someone to kill." Although they had driven around that neighborhood for 10, 20 minutes, basically hunting for Chin after the initial scuffle in the bar. They pled guilty, represented by counsel, cleaned up, dressed in their Sunday best, sober. They pled guilty to manslaughter and were sentenced to probation for 3 years and a fine of $3,000 each. That launched a movement such as the world hadn't seen before and hasn't seen since, a justice movement. Outrage, not just among Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans, not just among Asian Americans, but among everyone who asked, how can it be that two people could kill someone, admit they had done it, even if it hadn't been because of race, and be sentenced merely to probation. They said it was a bar brawl, not a hate crime. It just got out of hand. This case, well, it's the Asian American experience. It's mistaken identity twice over, right? You all look alike. That's what I was told. And in the gaslighting of childhood, I never would have wanted to talk about any of these issues. But this case, it brought it all home. It made me understand it wasn't just me. It wasn't in my head. And you couldn't just retort, "Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me," because the words lead to the sticks and stones. Because the words pack their own metaphorical, rhetorical punch. And that case was defining for so many people, not just me. It was someone of Chinese descent mistaken for Japanese. That wouldn't have been right if they found someone Japanese, but hatred isn't precise in any event. It was someone who was American mistaken for a foreigner, a perpetual foreigner, though he was assimilated, red-blooded, and if Chin had been white, he would have been a good old boy. He was not that much different than his attackers, except for his race. And that was all that mattered. He represented Tokyo and Toyota as far as they were concerned. So that case set me on the course of standing up and speaking out, becoming a lawyer, and over time, striving to be a leader. Let me give you a brief answer. I know we don't have that much time, and you have other questions, and we want to engage the audience. I wrote an essay a while back. Everything my Asian immigrant parents taught me turns out to be wrong. Now, I want to be clear. I owe everything, not just my existence and upbringing, not just the example they set, the sacrifices they made. My brothers and I, we could never achieve anything near the success that the first generation of strivers did. And that may be true of many of us who know this experience, right? I pay respect to my father, my late mother. I wonder, though, if what worked for their generation in a different era is still right for us. I'll give you an example of what I mean. So when I was a kid, they said not to protest, study, work hard, put your head down, don't fuss, don't complain. They were sure that if you did that, all would be well. Yet I wonder, because Asian Americans so often hit that glass ceiling, or as some call it, the bamboo ceiling, we do study, we work hard, and then we're taken advantage of because we don't fuss. We're easy targets for crime on the street. We're easy to exploit. That's why in higher education, for example, Mike, you know this from studying it, if you look at students, professors, Asian Americans are in many disciplines overrepresented. But then you look at deans, provosts, presidents, trustees, and there are hardly any. Even if you go to Silicon Valley, where Asian Americans are reputed to be so strong, you'll find that in terms of being promoted to management, Asian Americans are promoted at lower rates than anybody else. I mean, than any other community of color and whites. And that's even worse when you take into account how well educated on average Asian Americans are. So I was determined not to be deferential, polite. You know, when people say, oh, you Asians, you're all so polite, I want to give that person a rude gesture right away. Not because I'm politically correct or hypersensitive, but what is it to be polite? It's a way of reminding us that we have to know our place, right? There's a racial etiquette. And when you're told you're also polite, well, of course, it's a stereotype, it's a generalization, but it's a none too subtle signal. And it's a form of false flattery. It sometimes is used to compare Asian Americans to African Americans and other people of color to say, look at the Asians, they made it, why can't you? These stereotypes are changing, though. Stereotypes do change. Now there's a stereotype of pushy, rude Chinese tourists. So sometimes I wonder if maybe I should be extra polite to counteract that. Back to you, Mike, for another question.
Well, thank you for that. Talking about the connection of Vincent Chin and history into your desire to be a lawyer that addresses many of these issues. And so from that, I want to transition to a related question. You actually answered some other questions I had prepared in your comments. And so in a few months, you're going to be moving to New York to be the 11th president of Queens College, the first Asian American president of that institution. By the way, Queens College is and was an ANTAPAICS. And so for those watching who don't know what that acronym stands for, it stands for Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander Serving Institution, which is just the federal MSI designation for colleges and universities that have a large number of AAPI students. And so given this really difficult and heartbreaking time, with tragedies relating to police violence on our African-American communities and the impacts of COVID-19 and on higher education in general, as well as the racism that Asian Americans are experiencing due to this pandemic. As the new leader of Queens College, which obviously, as you know, is a very diverse institution, how will you address these issues? How will you bring the staff, the administrators, and especially the students together? And how does this institutional context kind of represent a microcosm for what's going on across the entire country?
Great questions, a whole set of them. You know, we're also a Hispanic serving school, and that's
right. That's right.
Both, and bridge building is at the heart of everything that I've done and hope to continue to do. I pursued this opportunity not because I wanted to be a college president. This is a true story. I applied and was in one search for Queens College. And if you had said to me 25 years ago, someday you'll be a college president, well, first of all, I would have scoffed at that because there were no Asian American college presidents. Not until the late Chancellor Chang Ten at University of California, Berkeley, in whose footsteps we all follow. We stand on the shoulders of giants, as they say. And if you had said to me that Flushing, Queens, would be so heavily Asian 25 years ago, I would have been skeptical. It was just starting then. But, you know, the borough of Queens, this isn't just my opinion or say so, it's not anecdote. Statistically, it's the most linguistically diverse place on the face of the planet. I've been given different numbers, but I understand at least 100 languages are spoken in the homes. Some people have said as many as 180, and I didn't even know there were 180 languages in use. That's what attracted me. And it still does. It is a challenge. This will be not days and weeks, but months and years for us to rebuild. Institutions, just like individuals, have to be resilient and cooperative. You know, even as we shelter at home, I'm here at home in San Francisco, though I will be there on July 1st when I officially start. Even as we're here by ourselves with kith and kin, we have to know that out there, that a place like Queens College, like the whole CUNY system, the largest urban public education system in the world, that they're strong, that they're stable, because that's what provides the foundation of this diverse democracy, our laws and our institutions. So I'm so looking forward to going there and demonstrating the value, the power of higher education. It's the engine of the American dream. I said when I applied, you know, I owe my existence to American higher education. That's true in a very literal sense. I wouldn't be here. My parents met on these shores. They'd both been born in China, grew up in Taiwan. It's a story familiar to many. They came to the United States in the early 1960s. Perhaps your parents or grandparents, for many of you, had that opportunity as well. That was a bygone era when America welcomed students from the world over. You might remember the more historically minded. It was the Sputnik moment. The Soviet Union had launched a beach ball-sized satellite. You know, now companies launch spaceships routinely. But back then, it was the space race, and the Soviet Union had beaten America to outer space. That meant America had to play catch up. And so one of the things that they did was they looked to the talent everywhere else. And America beckoned. That city upon a hill, as John F. Kennedy had called it, invoking a phrase that the founders had used when they first sailed across the Atlantic centuries ago. A city upon a hill with freedom and opportunity. And so my parents came here, given scholarships. That investment paid off for America because they put down new roots. They became citizens, taxpayers. Their children became native-born Americans. And so my parents met here. If they hadn't been offered scholarships to go to American colleges, they never would have met. I wouldn't have come into being. So this is full circle. I owe a enduring debt of gratitude. And it's not just for education. We all understand the importance of education. It's about access to education. You know, I'll tell you the truth. There are a lot of institutions of higher education that talk about access. Almost all, not all, but almost all talk about access. They talk about diversity. It's an ideal. It's an aspiration. But at Queens College and the CUNY system, it's a reality. I'm meeting the faculty, the staff, and most of all the students and the graduates, and so many of them. They're first generation, second generation. And I'm not making a pitch for Queens. I'm making a pitch for an ideal that if we want to have a diverse democracy, if we want to get Queens, New York City, America back on its feet again, we have to give people hope. It can't just be about disease and budget cuts. We have to say to people, this is the moment to invest again in the public good, in the common good. We've lost that sense, but University of California was founded with that, CUNY as well. It's the idea that even if you don't go to one of these institutions, you will benefit from it. It's about infrastructure. It's about building roads. It's about the idea that you have to care about your neighbor's child. Now I understand you care about your own family. We all do. But if you don't care about your neighbor's child at all, well, we see what the results of that are. It's in our own principled self-interest to pull together. And this moment exposes these divides. And there are so many demagogues, who would deliberately divide and exacerbate, worsen the divisions that are already latent, who choose to deny disparities. And when we look at higher education, that addresses so much. It doesn't just offer opportunity, it helps us come together on a college campus where as much as we can make it, where we're equals. And then because of that education, the credential, the network, people, well, they can move up in the world. That's how this engine works. And without it, you know, in the 1970s, a taxpayer revolt started, also in California, where people said, you want something, you pay for it. I'm not going to pay taxes for that. I don't benefit from, and then when you think about it, well, yes, you do benefit from the roads, the libraries, and the institutions of higher education. So you can't browbeat people into seeing their common cause. You have to show them. So as an advocate, I'm always looking for ways to explain. And let me wrap up by saying, especially right now, for Asian Americans, we stand at a crossroads, as America does as a whole. Asian Americans have I would even call it a moral dilemma. We have to decide, are we people of color? Are we domestic minorities? Will we stand with brothers and sisters who are Black and brown? Will we remain the perpetual foreigner, become Chinese or other ethnic nationalists, or honorary whites? We have these different choices before us, and they are fraught. And every moment when we are silent versus saying, excuse me, pardon me, that's not something you can do, not while I'm around. If we're not just bystanders, and we depend on others, the coronavirus bias that we're seeing all around us, where people blame us not just for the risk of contagion, but for economic demise, where people have been attacked in Texas, for example, a family of Burmese background, not Chinese, and US citizens, attacked by someone wielding a knife, physically attacked, not just name calling. Why? Because the assailant blamed them. That's what this is about. It's about blame. But it's about healing. There are two sides to all this. And when you look at who's on the front lines, as everyone has noticed, it's the Asian immigrant and Asian American doctors and nurses. We're overrepresented in the healthcare profession by probably 5 to 1, depending on how exactly you count, but at least 3 to 1. In other words, 3 times as many healthcare providers, first responders, as we make up of the general US population. It's just astonishing. And they're being exposed to risk. So we all have a role to play, and institutions as well.
Thank you for that. I want to start getting to some of the questions that have been coming in from our participants. But before I do, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about riding motorcycles. I know folks can see you zigzagging through Lombard Street in San Francisco on your Honda Hawk, of course, wearing your bright yellow jumpsuit. As a fellow motorcyclist, I have to ask, what's been the most interesting bike that you've ridden, and what's been your most interesting riding experience?
Well, I rode across country back in 1992. I might have to do that again to get to New York City. I do have a yellow racetrack ready suit. Kids sometimes wonder who I am, and I tell them I'm the yellow Power Ranger, or I'm yellow peril, right? Everything's connected in some way. I'll tell you, when I ride a motorcycle, I enjoy it. I always think I ride less than I would like to. I always think I need to get out on the road again. And I also do it because I don't want to be just the stereotypical nerd and geek. You know, I want to show Asian Americans have the full range of human experience, right? We laugh, we cry, we're athletes and artists, rebels and radicals. We don't just do math and science and play the piano as a child prodigy. So yes, I ride a motorcycle, and I'm happy and thrilled whenever I have a moment to be able to do that. It's interesting though. One of the things you notice when you ride a motorcycle is who waves. So some people wave at every other motorcycle. It's just kind of like this, where you nod your head. Some are brand specific, you know, so you're a Harley rider, you only wave at the others on Harleys. And you might even make a rude gesture to those on what's sometimes called a Jap bike, a rice burner. You know, you hear those terms, and sometimes hard to explain to someone. You know, they say, oh no, that's just an abbreviation, or, you know, what's the big deal? You know, they don't want to be told that there's something wrong there. I can forgive someone if they actually sincerely think it's an abbreviation, but once they're informed, if they keep using the term, knowing how harmful it is, it isn't just that it gives offense, it's that it causes pain unnecessarily. And if you keep using it, what you're saying is, I intend to cause that pain. And whenever Asian Americans for Black equality, we have to did a few years ago, even before everything we've seen, they wrote a letter to Asian immigrant parents explaining why they supported Black Lives Matter. It's so important that as allies, we do that without appropriating anyone else's suffering, but saying, we know your cause is not just your cause. I share a little bit of that. And I know that when I walk down the street, you know, the worst that happens is people do karate moves. They challenge me to a kung fu match, right? And that gives me a little glimpse into understanding what it must be like for people to look at you as a purse snatcher, as a mugger, a rapist, a murderer, or worse, even if you're just out bird watching, about as innocent a hobby as you could have. And it isn't just about these hurt feelings, because it escalates so quickly. It escalates when someone is angry, when there's a pandemic, when there's economic uncertainty. It escalates because of too much booze or testosterone. And somehow it moves quickly. Some of you have had this experience. You go for a parking space and someone doesn't like, they think they had dibs on it. They roll down their window, and it starts off, it's just about a parking space in a parking lot at the local supermarket, but it becomes racial. Go back to where you came from. You know, you Asian drivers, suddenly it's explosive, and you never know these days if that person is going to hop out of the car with a weapon or where this will go. It's those moments, it's beneath the surface. And if you're a person of color, you learn you have to calibrate and be aware of this context. So it all ties together, even when you're just thinking about motorcycling, you know, because there's some places you better not pull up to that bar on your Honda.
Well, thank you for that. Let me jump to some questions here real quick. And you wrote in the past about anti-Asian violence committed by the Black community. The most recent crime victimization statistics of 2018 indicate that the Black community committed the most crimes against the Asian community at a whopping 27.5%, whereas the reverse was less than 0.01%. When Asian Americans make an attempt to speak about this, they are often accused of being anti-Black, which hinders true progress between both communities. Can you speak about this, please? And how can we address these issues in a productive manner?
Sure. So I would say it's not the Black community, it's individuals who happen to be African American. And I don't for a moment want to gloss over, there are divisions and there is crime in every way. You know, even among Asian Americans, actually, the question has to be put into context, because, you know, the people most likely to commit violent crime toward you, no one wants to hear this statistic, but it is true. Every study confirms it. People you know. Stranger on stranger crime is just much less common. But for us to address it productively requires that we not say we're accusing every African American, because that is the essence of racial profiling, of stereotyping, but instead to look at what brings people into conflict with one another. How can we decrease these tensions that motivate some of what's happening, and how can we address it thoughtfully, not by riling people up, not by saying we should retaliate in some way, but at this particular moment, I don't know about you, but I have to say, I just can't see raising the issue of African Americans committing crimes when there is just so much documentary proof. The videos are so compelling that show African Americans on the receiving end of crime perpetrated by people acting with authority of law. Part of being both a good ally and politically astute is understanding priorities and timing. Now is a moment for Asian Americans to rally with African Americans. But yes, absolutely. We have to look at all these issues of violence and hate crime that divide in a way that looks for remedies, that looks for cooperation. I know we're just about out of time. So Mike, back to you.
Well, thank you for that. And I couldn't agree with you more on that. And so really, since we're running out of time, we'll ask the last question here, which is, what does it mean to be a resilient leader?
To be a resilient leader is what is most important, to be able to adapt. You know, Darwin said the race goes not to the strongest, the swiftest, nor the smartest, but those who adapt the best. I've come to see that the soft skills, being able to interact with people and to lead a diverse team, you know, physics is hard, but people are harder. As I look at what will be the biggest challenges at Queens College, I'll tell you, in terms of immediate concerns, issues I have to address, well, there's coronavirus and reopening, there's the budget, but most of all, it's giving hope to people. It's connecting with them. It's ensuring everyone understands we have different backgrounds. We have different opinions. We have different aspirations. But at the end of the day, this is a community. It is a nation that we are all members of. It's the body politic, that the public square, and we will eventually come back to a public square, just as a baseball stadium or a movie theater, the hurly-burly of the give and take, the exchange of ideas among people. And even if it's in a virtual platform such as Zoom, we yearn. I know people feel this as I do, the need for human contact. We have to interact with other people. You know, Aristotle said man, he would say human today. Is a social animal, are social animals. And the resilience is about individuals, yes, but it's also about community. It's about whether we can sustain that city upon a hill, a diverse democracy. It has been an honor to be in conversation with you, Mike, and to be in community with all of you. Stay safe and be well.
Thank you so much, President Wu, for sharing your knowledge with us, as well as making time to speak with us in APAICS. Madeline, back to you.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for joining us and sharing your knowledge and insight. We greatly appreciate it. Our next speaker will be on June 16th at 12:30 p.m. The Honorable Raj Singhal. He is a judge at the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Florida. So please feel free to RSVP at the link. Thank you again to both Mike and Frank for joining us this afternoon. And thank you to the audience for participating with us. Look forward to seeing you all the next time. Take care.
Bye-bye.